With their time in the MCU coming to a close, let's take a look at what the Russo brothers are doing now.
What you saw in her that made you say, yes, this is what I came here for. Sometimes I feel like I've already seen everything that's gonna happen. And it's a nightmare.
Given how much the Russo brothers helped to shape that latter half of the MCU, especially with Endgame, the Russo brothers were always going to have a hard act to follow. And so it's not surprising that they went from the whole cape and costume special effects thing to a more grounded drama. Not to mention the fact that this is based on a book where a guy took his own life story and turned it into its own narrative. Yeah, the guy who wrote this while in a Kentucky prison, and it was about the times that he was a opiate-addicted bank robber and former army medic. So this is a guy taking his own struggles in life and turning them into a narrative. And I was interested to see how this would turn out. I was excited following Endgame, and it seemed like a decent enough film. Unfortunately, what we got was a bloated mess. Something I've harped on once or twice before, and if you've been following me, I've mentioned it probably more than a couple of times. If your movie is over 2 hours, you better give me a damn good reason to keep my attention. Like, I know that 2 hours is kind of the standard for most dramas, so I don't really have a problem with that, but I'm seeing a lot more movies nowadays that seem to be pushing past the 2 hour mark into the 2.5 and 3 hour mark, and they have no reason to be doing that. Things like The Irishman and The Last Days of American Crime, pretty much everything that Peter Jackson has released after Lord of the Rings. None of these movies need to be pushing as long as they do. And the fact that they are feels excessive, indulgent even. While yes, film is a visual medium and you can employ more artistry and style into how you make a film, at the same point, if you're trying to tell a story, the longer you take to tell that story, no matter how visually interesting it may be, you're still wasting our time getting to the point of the story. That really was my biggest takeaway. There was no reason for this to be over 2 hours long. Like, sure, it was a drama, and maybe there was a lot of stuff in the book that may have warranted a lengthy sort of take on the story, but the way the Russos made it, it felt like they took a story that would have easily fit within 2 hours and just drew it out. It's like they kept going, stretch, when they're trying to pad for time or something. Scenes lasted way longer than they had any reason to, and it kind of didn't help that the Russos decided to use one of the most pretentious song choices, opera. And yeah, I'm a music student. I graduated with a degree in music. I studied classical music and music theory and all that, and I don't have a problem with opera. In fact, I have a very deep respect for opera. It's just that in terms of film, more often than not, the use of opera is there as a shortcut to make yourself seem smarter and more high class than you are. And I think that's the thing, is that you got guys like Scorsese and Coppola who would employ opera music into their films to varying degrees of quality, and that kind of led people to believe that, oh, I can just use opera as a means to shortcut my way to seeming more highbrow or more artistic. And it's just, yeah, I think people see it as a shortcut and a crutch. And that's not to say that film's bad for using opera. Like, if there's a reason to use opera, either stylistically or thematically, like if you're using a song that's tying into the themes of the story, that's perfectly fine. It's just that the way the Russo brothers did it, it feels more like my first student film, or the kind of movies that Barney's movie from A Star Is Burned was parodying.
My name is Barney, and I'm an alcoholic.
Mr. Gumbo, this is a Girl Scout meeting.
Is it? Or is it that you girls can't admit you have a problem? Don't cry for me. I'm already dead.
Yeah, imagine that, but trying to be taken seriously. Which isn't to say the movie's even that bad in terms of like the casting and performances. Tom Holland feels a bit miscast for this role, but he does well with it. He's not bad at it because he's not that bad of an actor. The real standout though is Sierra Bravo. Now, if you're an older Nickelodeon viewer, younger than me, older than now, you probably remember Big Time Rush, and she was one of the main characters on Big Time Rush. And now she's playing an opiate addicted love interest to Tom Holland. And she's killer in this. Like, honestly, I liked her better than Tom Holland in this movie. I think she acts circles around him. The girl is talented. Don't sleep on Sierra Bravo. I think she's really capable, and she should definitely get more work after this because she is a damn talented actress. Meanwhile, rounding out the cast, you've got Michael Gandolfini, son of the late James Gandolfini, and he's playing basically a better version of the kind of characters that the kid from Whiplash would play, whatever his name was. I've completely forgotten. Tice Simpkin plays similar roles, but Michael Gandolfini, I think, is acting circles around them in just this movie alone. You've also got Forrest Goodluck, who was introduced to us in The Revenant, and here he's playing the sort of stoner best friend. They're all addicted to opiates, so they're kind of all strung out, and he's pretty solid in this as well. We've got Jack Rayner as well, who I'm not as personally familiar with, but has been in a bunch of stuff. And he's really solid in this as the drug dealer who helps out Tom Holland with stuff. And then you've got Michael Rispoli, another Sopranos alum here, as the main sort of drug kingpin in Cleveland, because not only did the book take place in Cleveland, but you've got Cleveland-born and bred sons, the Russo Brothers, making a story about it. So yeah, they picked a story based in Cleveland and about Cleveland and filmed it in Cleveland. You know, like the good Cleveland boys they are. But yeah, the cast and performances are not the problem here. They're all solid, and the direction even is not the problem. Direction, cinematography, none of that is the problem. The problem comes from my least favorite part of the filmmaking process: the editing. The thing about editing is it's a part of the process that most people don't really think about. Like, you've got things like actors, directors, screenwriters, composers, producers. Those are the people that people kind of understand their role. Not a lot of people think about the editing process. And because of that, the only time you really think about the editing, unless you're somebody who is more familiar with the process, is when it's bad. I mean, for most people, editing is seamless. You know, if it's good, you have no idea what happened. It just went by. You didn't even think about it. And then you've got things like great editing, where some people may think like, oh, I remember that part, but I don't know why I liked it. I just know I liked it. So great editing can make you really remember and like a movie. Good editing, you're never even going to think about it. It's kind of thankless in that way. Meanwhile, bad editing is like when food goes bad in the fridge. Everyone will notice. Now, there's the kind that I refer to as hibachi editing. This isn't technical or anything. It's just my shorthand for the kind of editing that's very quick, almost second or shorter cuts in a movie. This is within a scene. So this is the kind of editing that I notice right off the bat. If you're cutting things too quickly, I immediately take notice of it and I think, wow, that's really cheap and bad. And I feel like it's trying to hide something. It feels like a cheap trick to try and make something look more than it is or look better than it is. And I feel like if you're willing to do that, you could just take the time and, make the scene look good. You don't have to cut it up like that. That's not this movie's problem. This movie's problem is more in the sort of narrative editing. So you've got the editing within each individual scene, but then you've got the editing that puts the scenes together, determines how long those scenes are. That sort of editing. That's this movie's problem. The scenes go on for longer than they need to. There's probably certain scenes that you could either be cut or just be trimmed. And then just the overall length of the story is kind of bulky and unnecessary. You could probably cut out a good half hour from this movie and it would be a marked improvement overall. And that's kind of why I'm harder on movies that are longer than 2 hours. It's not as bad as things like The Irishman, which bored me to tears, or The Last Days of American Crime, which had no reason to be 2.5 hours long. But if you're going to spend 2 hours and more of my time, it better be worth it. And there are plenty of movies that are longer and the Russos made one, Avengers Endgame. But that was the culmination of 10 years of storytelling, or even longer, I think. Just decades worth of storylines culminating into one. So that needed to be longer. But then you've got things like Return of the King, another culmination of the story, but one that packed every minute of it with something of goodness. And then even something like The Wolf of Wall Street, which is excessive, but also kind of the point, because it's talking about the excessiveness of Jordan Belfort, and namely that Leonardo DiCaprio is so captivating as Jordan Belfort that you don't tend to notice often. I mean, unless you're not into that sort of thing, which you will notice. But for me, I was captivated by DiCaprio, and then I thought Scorsese really made it kind of, chug along, even though it was over 3 hours. I think it was over 3 hours long, but it was just like this weird train wreck almost, seeing this guy's life. Not the movie. The movie was fantastic, but just seeing just how manic and wild everything was. Scorsese really captured that sort of just cocaine-fueled madness of it all. And that's not what I really got from here. I mean, granted, they're trying to go for more of a languid, this is about being addicted to heroin, so it's kind of going for a more languid thing, but so was Requiem for a Dream, but that still managed to chug along at a decent pace and didn't waste your time. I mean, not that you want to rewatch Requiem for a Dream. But I think that's kind of the problem with this movie, is the whole weight of it all. Just that, they even divide it into parts with chapter headings. They have, scene cards where it's like, Chapter 4, Chapter 5, Epilogue. And it's like, okay, yeah, this is super pretentious. And I feel like it's just the Russos riding off the high from their highest grossing movie of all time, only to be beaten out by the previous highest grossing movie of all time, Avatar, somehow, I don't know, adjusted for inflation, I guess. They were kind of riding off of this high, and I'm worried that they're going to go down the route of Peter Jackson and become these bloated, self-indulgent hot messes that have stopped since making good movies. God, I hope they don't become the next Peter Jackson. That would be awful. We only need one of him. So should you watch Cherry? I mean, I guess. I don't not recommend it unless it's because you don't have 2.5 hours to waste of your time. If you've got Apple TV Plus, so it's free, and I think it's exclusive, actually, to Apple TV Plus. But yes, once again, it's on Apple TV Plus. It's 2.5 hours long. You're not going to need to seek it out all that much unless you're doing a Russo Brothers retrospective or a Tom Holland watch everything he's in. It's not terrible. It's just too up its own ass for its own good.